So I welcome everyone this evening from the three congregations, First Congregational Church of Our Savior and Messiah Lutheran, and it's wonderful to gather together. We have had a relationship with Border Servant Corps, which is a border shelter in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And we had the opportunity to have Mica be our transition person. And she also set up a Zoom meeting, and some of us were on that, so we had a chance to meet her and see her. And we also had the opportunity to have her at our Synod Assembly, where she gave a 20-minute presentation in a workshop we did welcoming congregations, accompanying migrants. And now we get a chance to see Mica in person. And Mica is the Director of Engagement and Education for Border Servant Corps, and we're so glad to have you here. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Alrighty, so since this is a conversation a little bit more with kind of a hometown crowd, it's going to feel a little bit different from the presentations that I've been giving for congregations that are a little more of a cold call, right? So there's a couple of things that I wanted to share with y'all today, starting with a little bit of an overview about Border Servant Corps as an organization, and then an update of what we're seeing on the ground in the borderlands. But yes, as Doreen said, my name is Micaela. I go by Mica. It's got less vowels. And I have the huge privilege of working at Border Servant Corps. And I've been there for about 2 years. And it's been a joy to get to work with the guests that we serve, the asylum seekers that we serve. And one unexpected, just total icing on the cake kind of treat has been to also get to work with folks like y'all. So people in the interior of the US who have just surpassed our wildest expectations of hospitality and of kindness, and working with congregations like yours, I get to see Christ work, and it gives you shivers. It's it was something that I hadn't expected, an aspect of the work that I hadn't expected, and so truly from the bottom of our hearts, we are grateful beyond words for what especially what Messiah has done and had signed up to do. So please know that it means the world to those of us who are kind of on the front lines. So a little bit about Border Servant Corps. We started in 1997 as a ministry of Peace Lutheran Church, which is an ELCA church in the Rocky Mountain Synod down in Las Cruces, New Mexico. So we've been around for a little while. For much of that time, we ran a year-long sort of year of service, volunteer program similar to AmeriCorps. And that really helped us to establish a lot of the relationships with different organizations in the community that we're now calling on for the two programs that we do. The first and the older program is what we call our Border Immersion experience or Border Immersion program. And that's an opportunity for us to host folks from the interior of the US to come and spend some time with us, to let us take you around, to meet cool folks in the borderlands and hear a variety of different perspectives, to let us feed you all sorts of local food, and for y'all to let the borderland communities tell you their own story, as opposed to having to rely on the stories that other people tell about them. So, open invitation. In Spanish or in the Mexican culture, when you tell someone where you live, if you like them, you follow up with, y ahí está su casa, and there also is your home. So I have been sent up here from Las Cruces, New Mexico. Y ahí está su casa, and there also is your home. So open invitation for anyone here who might be interested in coming down and spending a little bit of time with us and letting us host you. So I'm more than happy to answer questions about that in a little bit. The second program that we do, the second ministry that we do, is what y'all are a bit more familiar with, and that is our hospitality center. So we serve as a short-term, kind of high-volume, transitionary shelter for asylum seekers that have come to the U.S.-Mexico border, have turned themselves in to either customs at the ports of entry or border patrol between the ports of entry, have been thoroughly vetted, so iris scans and fingerprints, and haven't shown up on Interpol or on the CIA or FBI databases or anything, right? Have been released into the United States to put together a case for asylum, which will eventually be presented to an immigration judge. But in the meantime, they are allowed to enter the United States and apply for asylum from within the country. And that's where we come in. So our guests are dropped off to us directly by the Department of Homeland Security, so either Border Patrol or ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And so we are the first place that people are taken when they are released from detention, essentially from custody. And that is it's a huge privilege, getting to be the first non-detention folks that our guests meet in the United States. And we take that responsibility very seriously. We're able to provide people with about 48 hours-ish of hospitality. So a safe place to sleep and a fresh change of clothes and a shower and more food than they've been able to receive in detention. Toys for the kiddos, medical care, prescriptions if they were taken from them when they were detained. And so we love on them for a couple of days. And one of the most important things that we do is we connect our guests with whoever's going to be receiving them in the United States, so whatever their next step is going to be. In the US, we do not have a formal system set up to provide shelter or social services for folks who come as asylum seekers. We do have a system set up with some gaps and some holes, but we do have a system set up for folks who come as refugees, right? So who come to the United States after being, applying, I guess, to be a refugee with the United Nations and receiving the stamp of approval by the United Nations, and then being assigned the United States as their host country. So for folks who come through that pathway, there are services available, and some really great organizations on the U.S. side that help them find housing and enroll kiddos in school and find a job and get settled. But for folks who come as asylum seekers, none of those services are available. And so essentially the entire financial burden of living falls on the individual or on whoever is going to be their informal host in the U.S. Oftentimes, and most of the time, that host ends up being a family member or a friend of the family. Most of the time, people come to the U.S. partly because of our reputation as being a place that is safe and a place that is welcoming and a place where people can do better than they've done. But also, largely, because they've got someone here who's going to receive them. So my husband's uncle lives in Virginia, and so we're going there, or my sister immigrated 10 years ago. She lives in Kansas, and so we're going there. So that's the case for most people. For a small fraction of families and individuals that we receive, that is not the case. They don't have anyone to receive them. And so we'll chat a little bit more about kind of that subpopulation in a second. But most of the families that we're receiving right now, well, first off, they are mostly families. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, does not have detention capacity for families right now, which is great in the sense that the families then end up at the border shelters as opposed to being detained. So about 50% of the individuals that we receive on a daily basis are kiddos. Most of them are school-aged or quite young. Usually the kids that are too young to be left at home with a family member and instead need to be taken on the journey. We're receiving right now, at least in May, which is the last time we tallied up our counts, we're receiving a lot of families from Colombia, a lot of families from Brazil, and Guatemala, as well as a significant number of folks from Turkey. And then, so on and so forth, countries after that. Our guests do come to us from all over the world. We've, in about the 2 years-ish that we've been running the hospitality center, we've gotten folks from 55 countries. So it really is quite a diverse population that we have the privilege of serving. So I talked a little bit about, in sort of very simplified aggregate terms of the process that people follow to end up at our shelter. This process is quite fluid in the sense that federal policies around immigration and kind of the administrative practices can change day to day, and so that creates quite a confusing environment, both for the organizations that do this work and for the folks who are trying to navigate the system. Right now, we have a couple of federal policies that are throwing a bit of a wrench into the simplified process that I just described. So we expected, after the lifting of Title 42, right, the COVID era public health order that shut down the border and that gave Border Patrol the authority to expel people from certain countries back into Mexico for fear of COVID, right? We expected that once that lifted, that we were going to see a significant increase in the number of individuals not only coming to the U.S.-Mexico border, but also being allowed to cross into the U.S. and seek asylum from within the U.S. Unfortunately, from our perspective, that has not been the case. So numbers are down pretty significantly. We were expecting to be receiving 250 people a day at our shelter. And right now we've been receiving between 10 and 50 a day. So a significant decrease. And that's for a variety of different reasons. One is because everyone who is seeking to enter the U.S. to seek asylum is now being required to prove that they have an appointment that they have obtained through a phone application. So it's called the CBP-1 app, so Customs and Border Protection app. And just like the apps that we have on our own phones, it can be glitchy, and it can be slow, and it's all in English. And this is, of course, assuming that individuals on the run, individuals on the move, often in very challenging, very dangerous situations on the Mexican side of the border, have working cell phones and are able to access enough Wi-Fi or cell phone service to be able to navigate that process. And of course, assuming that individuals have the tech skills to get that far. So if you do not have an appointment with the CBP1 app, with the name of the application is called CBP1. So it's Customs and Border Protection is a branch of the Department of Homeland Security. Yes, sir. So it's a government. Yeah. It's alphabet soup with the with the acronym. So don't you worry. So if you don't have an appointment that you have obtained through this phone application, through this app, and just approach the border, you are being required to meet a higher standard of it's a higher burden of proof. So before, you could approach the border, and as long as you could convince an immigration official that you had a credible fear of returning to your home country, then you would be allowed to apply for asylum in the United States. Now, you have to prove that you have a reasonable fear. I haven't been able to figure out exactly what the difference is, but what I've been told is that a reasonable fear is a step above credible fear. So it's a higher threshold. It's a more stringent requirement. And so you have to be able to prove that you are in, my understanding is in immediate danger, not only of being returned to your home country, but of being in whatever situation you're currently in that would necessitate you to enter the United States. And that's, the requirements are quite strict, so it's often quite hard to pass that interview. And so, if someone approaches the U.S.-Mexico border right now, and they don't have an appointment through the app, and they are not able to convince our immigration officials that they have a quote-unquote reasonable fear of returning to their home country or back to their current situation, then they are deported. So we've gone back to the kind of standing immigration law of deportations under Title 8, which basically says if you come to the U.S. Without through one of these various legal pathways, you will be deported back to your home country, and there will be a 5-year ban on you being allowed to return. So numbers are down partly because deportations have gone up so significantly, and also because folks have heard that this is the situation, and they're scared, and they're holding off. So that's kind of an update of what's happening in what we're seeing on the ground, which if we had to find a silver lining in this current situation, I would say would be that the significantly decreased numbers do provide us with an opportunity, at least for the folks on my team, to turn our attention inwards towards the interior of the United States and towards our faith family in the U.S. And start building connections and building relationships and inviting congregations like yours to consider, prayerfully consider, whether you might be willing to open your doors to sponsor an asylum-seeking family. So I mentioned earlier that most of the folks that we receive, most of the folks that come to the U.S. have someone that's going to receive them here. They have a plan. And in the vast majority of cases, that's exactly what happens. They're with us for a couple of days. We help them contact their sponsor, their point of contact, whoever's going to receive them. They'll purchase them tickets, and off they go. And then they start the kind of long, hard slog of putting together an asylum application and eventually presenting that to a judge. For a smaller, so it's kind of concentric circles, right? So for a chunk of those folks, whether because their sponsor falls through and is no longer able to receive them, or in some cases, if their family was separated along the journey and the chunk of the family that made it here was not the one with the connection to the sponsor, or in some cases, if they didn't have anyone to receive them in the first place. We find this to be the case particularly with some of our Venezuelan families. Often that's because the migration from their home country to our country hasn't been as consistent in the last few years. And so they just don't have anyone here to receive them. So for that population, we work with them a little bit more, because if they don't have a sponsor, then we have to be kind of creative to piece together something for them to move forward. Depending on their demographics, on their age and the makeup of the family, some of these families are able to cobble together money and just go to a city that they've heard of and that they feel comfortable going to. So we send a lot of folks to Chicago or New York or Denver, because families have heard that there's a system in place to receive them. So some folks will go there. Sometimes for single adult individuals, we're able to find them spaces in homeless shelters or women's shelters to provide them with that will be their next step. But in Spanish we say de vez en cuando, right? Every so often, we do have a family that needs a little bit extra help. So this is often families with young children, or slightly larger families, or folks that have a medical issue, or a sick child, or someone for whom a shelter would be a difficult place for them to be, and someone for whom just going to New York to figure it out is a risky option. And it's for this kind of like smallest of our concentric circles, for this population that we reach out into our faith family in the U.S. And ask if there's room at the inn, right? If there's someone who might be able to receive them. So it is with that invitation that I also come today to invite y'all to consider whether this is something that you might be willing to do. I do want to make sure that I extend another very heartfelt thanks to Messiah for having taken a chance on this once already, and for having done so with such kindness, and being willing to just kind of step out into the unknown there. I do want to note that for any congregation that chooses to partner with us in this and chooses to answer the call, we can't guarantee a happy ending. Just as we can't guarantee a happy ending to any of our guests that sit down across from our staff and say, I'm terrified. I really don't want to be sent back. Can you promise me I won't be sent back? Right, we can't make those kinds of promises to our guests, and unfortunately we can't make those kinds of promises to our partners either. because the folks that we serve have been through very challenging situations, and they're working through a system that has been stacked against them in so many ways. And so taking on something like this is definitely a risk, and it's a big ask, and we know that. But we feel that it is this risk, and it is this uncertainty, this lack of clean, easy guarantees that makes this work as holy as it is, and that makes it as worthwhile as it is. Because we're being called to love in a way that isn't easy. Yeah, and maybe that makes it a bit more Christ-like. No? So, thank you again for the opportunity to come and speak to you, and to share a little bit about what's going on in our neck of the woods. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I think we might be moving into a smaller space to kind of hash out any of the questions and answers. And I'll make sure to leave my contact information in case any of our friends joining us virtually have any questions as well. So that way we can make sure to get back to you as well. Thank you for joining us from a little bit further away. We super appreciate your time. Thank you.